Hey guys, AK88 on cars. We're finally doing it, part 2 of restoring my late father's VX220 Turbo. This time we've got suspension, we've got big brakes, we've got custom designed parts, and we've got a ton of fails. Let's see if I actually managed to get a whole bunch of these parts actually onto the car successfully or not. I mean, I obviously did. I'm sunburnt as hell. I obviously got the car back this weekend, but let's check it out anyway. Guys, I'm so excited to share this update with you. It feels like it's been such a long time in the workings, from ordering the parts earlier in the year in 2022 to only recently just getting the car back. But just before we jump into the works, let's give you a little bit of a refresh about what this project is. So this is about restoring my late father's VX220 Turbo, a car that he bought brand new back in early 2000s as his treat for raising my brother and I as kids, which he very much deserved, let me tell you that much. My father unfortunately passed away last year whilst he was still in his 60s, a reminder to us all to make sure that we live life to the fullest. But one of his things I wanted to do for his legacy was, the car had been sitting in a garage for a number of years, really without much attention. Check out my first video, which is I think up here, which I deal with sort of just making the car run and getting it back to working order. But this time we're talking about doing some seriously cool works. So if you've been following my channel or this project, you'll know from the unboxing video that I did earlier in the year, which is probably here or here now, I ordered a huge amount of parts from EliseParts.com. If you don't know who EliseParts.com are, they're a specialist Lotus derived parts supplier. And what's really cool about Elise Parts is they don't just supply third-party parts, but they also manufacture these really high-quality parts themselves, and some really involved stuff, such as uprights, which unsurprisingly was one of the things on my suspension and brake list. So we had a huge list of parts here. I'll give you a quick snapshot. So we had big brakes on the front, so alley bells and discs, as well as larger AP4 pots on the front. That was to replace the stock AP2 pots that were on the front, where I had earlier this year pretty substantial part of bad brake fade on some spirited road driving, so I thought we were going to change those straight away. We had what effectively was a big brake conversion on the rear as well, which was moving the front calipers onto the rear and buying some special uprights, which I'll talk about in a minute, which could mount both the standard rear brake caliper, which purpose was just to do the handbrake, as well as the front calipers going on the rear to do the main force of the braking. And again, those were alley wheels and desks. Now, it had to be quite large, so on the front we went for, I believe in the end, 125mm, which is as large as I understand we can fit on a kit such as this on the front. And we went with, I think it was 304mm on the rear, which seemed huge, but again, was required to fit with the uprights I bought. On the subject of the uprights, these are one of my favourite things that I bought from Elise Parts. So these are billet aluminium uprights. So the upright is the section that mounts between the hub to the suspension and to the wishbones as well. And the reason I bought this was to realign the wheel geometry, so when I lowered the car, the wheels would still end up dead straight. These were so beautifully made. Other than that, I also got a set of new Nitron NTR 640 three-way adjustable suspension sets. They had the remote reservoirs, which I've always wanted on the car. I've never actually had remote reservoirs on a car before. These were amazingly well made. Nitron is a British company, and if you want to see a little snapshot of that suspension, again, there's a link to another quick video that I did up there. Other than that, we dealt with a number of handling parts, so these included things like bump steer, sort of adjusters to go on the front steering rack. We went for new suspension bushing right the way through, including some rather cool tweaked up racing parts, racing ball joints from Elise Parts, which we thought were pretty cool, as well as some more minor mods as well. The list was quite substantial in the end. If you want to, again, check out more parts in the unboxing, really recommend checking out that unboxing video yonder. So there was 2 other things that I did with the car as well. So some were some cosmetic mods, which I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail in this video. I have another video coming out as part 3, probably detailing that. The other thing that I did was got new wheels. So the car had 17-inch wheels as standard, but these were the ones that came from factory. They were stock, they're pretty heavy, and I wanted a bit of a change. The other thing is because the front wheels were so narrow because of the 60-40 weight distribution and how Lotus decided to set up the wheels, it meant that it was really difficult to buy decent tyres. That's because we effectively had something that I think was only maybe 185 sort of wide, but then sort of the diameter of the wheel was 17-inch, so we just couldn't get any decent tyres for them, so that was another reason for them to go. I found these really cool wheels called, I think they were called Motec Nitrons, and I bought them from a German site. That was a huge ordeal. I was slightly worried that I might have been scammed by them initially, just because there was a huge wait time. The Motec website itself didn't ever really seem to work properly. I don't know if that was something that was just down to my computer or not. And the wheels were also incredibly competitively priced for something that really didn't weigh that much at all. In fact, I believe the fronts only weighed, I think 7.9 kilos, and the rears weighed 9.1 kilos. So really light wheels. That's a significant saving over the stock form. Plus I thought they looked pretty cool. So with all those parts ordered, I was off to the next stage, the fitting. So I collected my treasure chest of boxes and parts up together and decided I was going to head back to Torque Developments International in London. Now, if you guys don't know these guys, you might have seen my previous videos. These are a very well-known engineering and tuning company that I've worked with many years. Mark, Dennis and the team over there are really excellent, great customer service, and are just an amazing quality of workmanship. It's one of those places where you can take something and just know it's going to be done properly. So I went over there with these great summer parts, originally back in the early stages of April. Originally, the work required to use the car started off a bit slowly. Most of that was my fault. There was still some parts that we needed to complete. I hadn't ordered the tyres yet, and there was a few other parts that would really stop us getting started before the car was completely immobile. But in no time at all, it was looking like a good old-fashioned Star Wars speeder. As you can see some amazing pictures here. The car of the future. This is sort of one step beyond. Once everyone starts putting electric motors, the next thing it will do is start hovering. Maybe it will be invented by Stark Industries, who knows. And the car was stripped down. Now, actually, when we took most of the components off, they weren't actually in a bad state. Despite the car covering around 40,000 miles over its life, the car's condition was kept always dry, in a garage or similar, which would really help there not to be a huge amount of corrosion on the components of the suspension. These components, especially the uprights, can really quite rust over time due to their method of construction. But just before we go any further, a quick word from our sponsor. The sponsor is me. I don't have any sponsors. This is just a quick plug to say that I've set up an 8K 88 on Cars Instagram channel. So if you want to see some cool pictures of, I consider them cool pictures of VX220s and project cars and stuff that I'm working on racing, please give it a follow. The content I will try to be nice and quality, and also be pictures for stuff that you haven't seen on my YouTube channel. So if you want to see another dimension, please do go and check that out. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, back to the content. So once the car was stripped down, we were finally ready to start putting the new parts on. Now, anyone that hasn't done works to cars like this, where you're sort of putting one modified part onto another modified part against a third modified part, a little bit of a fourth one coming in, will know that it's pretty inevitable that stuff is not going to fit. And this was my dying worry with this, because normally when stuff doesn't fit with suspension, wheels and tyres, it's normally something quite major. The wheels don't fit and need to be, it can get very costly very quickly. So I had my fingers crossed tight that we weren't going to get into any of that trouble. So here we can see the guys have laid out some of the car parts that we installed. Now you also notice that we actually got the wishbones powder coated. I did think about getting brand new ones, but actually because the car had been dry stored, they were actually in remarkably good condition. So we simply sent them off to a powder coater to add a little bit of rubberized protection on there to hopefully fend off that sort of nasty, wearing, penetrating water that will inevitably happen as the car gets driven. So the parts look amazing here. Now we started to put these on, started by obviously pressing all the bushes into the housings and fitting all the other bearings and such, and initially we were doing really well, so it was really fantastic, so everything seemed to go on properly. We got to the position where we got the suspension on, the uprights on and all the wishbones on, all going perfectly. We tried to next fit the brakes, they slid on perfectly. The kits that Elise Parts made were really great, so Mark, Dennis and the team didn't really have to do any modification to the existing braking system beyond some modification of the existing handbrake cables and little bits and pieces that we knew that we were probably going to do. I also had a few other little bits and pieces supplied by Type 116 Motorsport, which is run by a guy called Chris. Chris is a great guy. He's always on the other end of the phone to help me, and I definitely recommend checking out his website. So he sent me these really cool sort of brackets for the Nitron solenoids that he made up especially. He designed them and 3D printed them, and it made the mounting so much easier. One less thing to do. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate your time on this one. So again, at this point, we're doing really great. So we actually did apply some cosmetic coating to some of the items. I applied some to the brake calipers as well as the wheels, because you're only going to get one chance to do it when the wheels are off. Let's see if it helps. I think ultimately anything that helps defend against what will naturally be a huge amount of brake dust with these bigger brakes is probably a good thing. So again, we got those. We got the wheels mounted to the tyres. I got some Tayo RAARs after some recommendations for people on VX220.org, which is the sort of official, unofficial VX220 forum, which you should check out, by the way, if you're into VX220s. And we were going nice and strong. So now we're at the point where the whole car is about to start to get ready to come together. So I think it was on a Tuesday one day, I get a call from Mark at TDI, and this is fail number one. Mark calls me up and he goes, yeah, Alex, slight problem, the wheels don't fit. And apparently what happened is when we went to go and put the wheels on, it actually hit the rear mounting of the suspension. When we put spacers onto it, because the uprights had pushed the wheel geometry up so level with the arches, it would have effectively meant that the wheels would be outside the arches, which would have failed an MOT unless we bolt those fairly terrible sort of bolt-on arches over the top. It was my heart sank at that news. I thought, God, I'm going to have to reorder some wheels. I just had to wait 6 months to receive the first set. How much am I going to have to spend and how long are we going to have to wait to get the second set? Now, luckily, this wasn't a total fail, because when we actually dialed the geometry back in properly and actually set up the camber, the toe, and everything else correct, actually just about fit. It was millimeters there, but that was, that was close call number one. That was close call number one. Now, the other thing that went wrong slightly, and this was an actual fail, so fail number two is, again, when you have those sort of modified parts on modified parts on modified parts, you're going to get things aren't fitting right. And despite ordering tyres for the sizes that were said on the German website, because again the geometry had been changed, the wheels were on the front were scrubbing and hitting the inside arch, and it was pretty bad. I was only getting to sort of like halfway lock before it was scrubbing, so it was with great pain that only after sort of probably 10-15 miles on those tyres I had to pull them off and go for something a little bit different. On reflection, I took Dennis's recommendation. We ordered a slightly skinnier profile. The other thing was I couldn't get the RAARs in the profile that I eventually needed. So we had to order a brand new set of Yokohamas, and again, it just barely fits it. So it's a really tight fit, but again, that's another problem that we managed to solve. Now there was one more fail, so fail number three. So when ordering this suspension, I knew that this Nitron package was track focused. I mean, it was a hardcore track focused package. But the reason why I went for it is because it was the only set that offered this level of adjustment. And whilst I might not be using all of that adjustment now, I think as the car is basically owned forever, I think I'll have different uses of it. And I wanted to have that ability to dial the car in for the use that I had. Now, the one quite interesting thing is when we fitted it, Mark phoned me and said, the suspension is pretty harsh. Now, unfortunately I didn't get a video of this, But Mark demonstrated this by jumping on the sills of the VX, whereby the car basically didn't move at all and it almost bounced off the wheels, that there was just no suspension travel. I think the rear springs had a sort of loading capacity of, I think, 700 pounds, which just seems crazy high for a car that, you know, in total only weighs sort of 950-ish kilograms. So, you know, but Nitron being the great business they are, I phoned them up. They suggested you know, what the range of spring options I could go for. They said, you know, if I wanted to go for it at the softest, I shouldn't go any less than 450 pounds on each side. Mark, Dennis and I talked about it, and Dennis said to me, well, you know, for most track or most sort of street users, you might even go even lighter than that. But if they're saying 450, then because they designed the suspension set and they know if they go any softer it will probably mess up the adjustment, let's just go with that. So I was really worried I was going to get completely sort of, you know, bent over as it were by Nitron for this, given the suspension set was pretty costly as it is. But actually they weren't. The springs were about £70 per corner, which I was really relieved at. So after all that hard work, we finally had the car back together, and I think the finished product speaks for themselves. Check this out. So after finishing the last problem, which was dialing in a brake bias valve into the front, where there was some confusion between the brake system design per GM's actual specifications versus actually what seemingly ended up in the car. So we actually finally managed to get that plumbed up, which was really cool. Again, just because we've got so big brakes on the back, we're a little bit conscious of sort of rear sort of braking bias and want to be able to adjust that. Not actively on the track, which is normally where brake bias valve should be, somewhere that you can actually get hold of it. We decided to stick it under the bonnet because it was kind of a set it and see mechanic here. But I finally get a call from Dennis and Mark, and Dennis and I went out for a test drive. Dennis was explaining all the geometry setup changes that he made and why he arrived at such decisions. The car rode beautifully, the suspension didn't feel any harsher than the suspension set that came off. It was beautiful, it felt tight, and finally the car stopped properly. No longer was I having to sort of plough my foot to the floor and wait for something to happen. The car was stopping on a dime. Which was fantastic. So I took the car out for a long drive, and again, I couldn't be more happy with the results. This thing, I've missed it so much, it's so fast and now feels as stable and as planted as it should for the power that it's running. So guys, what do you think of the results? I'm so happy of how we turned out. So I've got more updates to come. I did a whole bunch of bodywork recently, including ordering new carbon fibre parts and doing some pretty cool finishes, which I think you might like. Half painted, half carbon, adding some really special touches to it. But that's for another video. That's for part 3, which I can make if you guys are interested. I'm also going to take the car on a really long road trip into Europe this summer as well. I enjoyed it so much last year when we went to Switzerland. This year I'm going to try and head a little bit further down south in Europe. Let's see how we get on. I'm hoping to visit some really cool Lotus and VX220 specialist firms as I go down there, including a firm that manufactures carbon fibre parts bespokely, which would be pretty cool. So again, stay tuned for that. That will probably be episode number 4. So guys, hope you enjoyed this video. As always, anything that you want, anything you think, anything you like, please give me a like, or dislike as it might be if you thought the content was terrible. If you've got a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave them down in the comments, and a subscribe is always appreciated. Otherwise guys, take care and catch you in the next one.